You know, it's been a while since I've seen big budget animated movies that usually receive theatrical releases, and sometimes I feel guilty for not catching up with the latest ones that have been coming out. But then I watched Scoob 2020 and all of that guilt went straight downhill. This movie is really bad. Like, it honestly kind of offends me just how washed up and cynical this is. Now, despite what I've alluded in the past, I wouldn't consider myself a massive Scooby-Doo fan. I grew up with it, there are some movies I like, and I love Mystery Incorporated. But I wouldn't describe my connection with the franchise as that deep and meaningful. But this movie, it awakened some fanboyism inside of me. Although, to be honest, a lot of my problems are more so emblematic of the issues I have with Hollywood movies. I shit you not, 2 minutes in I was already angry because it just felt like every other animated movie. It had the exact same sound design, literally indistinguishable from any other theatrically released CGI cartoon, aside from I guess having a few Hanna-Barbera sound effects, which I guess were meant to emit nostalgic feelings, but they just felt more out of place than anything. The body animations were the same as other children's CGI movies. Like, pay attention to the way they move and their facial expressions, especially during emotional scenes, and you'll start to notice a few resemblances. And the final nail in the coffin was the overall tone, which I think was made even more apparent later on, but even at the very beginning you can tell. And you know what pisses me off about this is that I know there are a ton of people, like a lot of people, who are just gonna be okay with this largely because it's a different take on Scooby-Doo. It's CG instead of animated in 2D, and it doesn't follow the typical mystery formula with predictable red herrings, and that alone is enough for people to get excited for this. And while I do acknowledge that Scooby-Doo is pretty formulaic and oversaturated, is this really a good solution? Like, I'd much rather watch a familiar Scooby-Doo movie than a predictable, trite, and uninspired animated schlock. Like, honestly, I was so bored that eventually I started zoning out and focusing on other stuff. I was having more fun scrolling through Twitter's trending tab than paying attention to this. Now you might be thinking, hold on, aren't you, like, a reviewer or something? Shouldn't you pay your full attention and give the fairest review you can? Now, look, buddy, I'll have you know, one time I watched Bakwan, subtitle, may I remind you, while I was washing the dishes. And this wasn't just a one-time thing. I've done this several times, okay? I know what I'm doing. I don't have that much trouble multitasking. Furthermore, I don't care. It's really hard to give a shit when a movie has spiraled into a completely different direction that seems unrecognizable to what I expect from a Scooby-Doo entry. None of the tone and cheesy charm that I've grown fond of is present there. It's just a shitty film that ironically is more predictable than anything I would see from Scooby-Doo. I'm pretty sure I guessed every single thing that happened, like every ounce of development that would entail. The moment where I actually laughed was when Shaggy and Scooby unironically broke up later down the line in order to transition to the third act. Like, I was literally memeing all throughout the experience about how this movie would totally write that like some kind of item on a checklist, and that's exactly what happened. It was so funny. And you know, what's legitimately offensive about this is that this is a movie that is clearly aimed, at least partially, towards adults. It has some jokes that almost exclusively cater to them, and it has this sort of cynical attitude where it lacks sincerity and low-key talks shit about Scooby-Doo. Like, for example, when they diss Shaggy's speech patterns, or when they commented on how this wasn't gonna be another typical mystery-solving story. But look, man, you can't just wink at the camera and acknowledge my existence as if you expected my presence, while also literally taking a piss at something I grew up with and giving me a bunch of boring derivative kiddie stuff that I have no tolerance for. The comedy wasn't even funny. I hated every single joke there. The only one I kind of liked was when Fred had a crush on this blonde police officer and he had googly eyes all throughout. Now, it wasn't that in specific that made me laugh. What was kind of funny was how it turned out that was Dick Dastardly in disguise. So quite literally, Fred had the hots for a trap. It wasn't even really funny, to be honest. I just have to commend the movie for doing the best to transform a meme into reality. Oh yeah, the movie also had references to old stuff and featured some classic Hanna-Barbera characters, so yay, I guess. Hurrah for the continuation of nostalgic exploitation. Man, I retract everything I said in my previous video. Anyway, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I had an entire segment I prepared that had something to do with hentai or whatever, but I just don't care anymore. This is a garbage piece of shit movie and I give it a 1 out of 10.